Well, we're going to talk about international investment, which means buying a foreign asset instead of a domestic asset. International investment with cover. And cover means selling the proceeds of the investment in the forward exchange market in order to avoid exchange rate risk. So the international investment is buying, let's say we're American investors, so we're buying a British bond instead of a US bond. We're going to keep with the pound. So these are comparable assets with they'll have the same time to maturity. Let's do a 90-day bond. And then for the most part, most people regard the US and the UK as comparably risky in terms of country risk, so they don't have really different risk profiles in terms of whether they're likely to default. So the only thing that's going to differ between these two bonds is the interest rate, the rate of return on the bond. So buying a British bond instead of a US bond. This is going to be our international investment. Covered means that we are going to sell the pound in the forward market in an amount equal to the principal that we, if it's $1,000 bond, 1,000 plus whatever interest we earn, in amount of the principal plus interest on the bond. So we have avoided any exchange rate risk. So this is something that people can do. I mean, I'm old enough actually that I date back the time when you weren't really allowed to do this. So most of the countries had capital controls that made it illegal to simply decide you have a preference for buying US bonds if you're British or British bonds if you're American. But now with the relaxation of capital controls, you can shop around and buy the bonds that you like. Okay, so we've got an interest rate on the American bond, and let's talk about a 90-day bond, a 3-month bond. That will mature in 90 days. And we have an interest rate payable on a British bond, IUK for United Kingdom. So that's the interest rate on a UK bond. And again, it's going to mature in 90 days. So we got these two interest rates and we're going to compare them. And at first glance, it should seem obvious that we should buy the bond with the highest interest rate. So if there was no exchange rate risk, the exchange rates were fixed and everyone believed they would stay fixed, there's no exchange rate risk, just take the bond with the highest interest rate. That's the best place to put your money in. But there is exchange rate risk. So if we're an American investor, what we could do is if we decide we want to buy the UK bond, we could buy it, but then we could sell pounds in the forward market. So one thing that's going to be important, of course, is F, which is the forward premium on the pound, which we talked about in the last video. And of course, F can be negative because the pound could be at a forward discount. So the rule on this is we have a covered interest differential, which is equal to the forward premium on the pound plus the UK interest rate minus the US interest rate. And I'll give you some numbers so you can see what might work out. We'll do one where there's an obvious reason for moving into the pound. Let's say that the suppose F is equal to 2%. So what we're saying is that over this 90-day period of the life of this bond, that the pound is at a forward premium of 2%. Okay, so that means that the pound's more valuable I guess, in the forward market than it is in the spot market. And then let's make up some numbers like IUK. Let's give them the same interest rate. Let's give them, say, 3%. That's rather high by today's standards, but they've got the same interest rate on the comparably risky asset. But if we let's call this the covered differential CD, it will be 2% plus 3% minus 3%. So the bonds pay the same, but the pounds at a form of premium. So this is a plus 2%. I'll put the plus sign in there. And that says that if you buy the, you should move into the UK asset because the pound is at a forward premium that adds to the rate of return on top of the rate of return that you get from merely holding the bond for 90 days. And then let's think about what this will tend to do then is that everyone will want the pound. So investors buy the pound in the spot market because you want to buy British bonds. You got to buy the pound first, and then you sell the pound forward. That's what everyone's doing. And so by doing that, if you're buying the pound, you're pushing up the spot price and you're pushing down the forward price. So the F is falling. F will be falling. So having this this covered differential in favor of the pound denominated assets will actually cause the F to fall, the forward premium to fall. And also, of course, if you are if everyone buys British bonds, so there's a rise in the demand for the UK bond. So you got an increased supply of money buying the bond, then that's going to cause downward pressure on the interest rate in the UK, and there's a falling demand for the US bond, which will put upward pressure on the interest rate. There's less money available, so the US is going to have to raise their interest rate, and you can see this is going to collapse. Well, this might even become negative, of course, if that's going on. So there's two adjustments taking place that if there is, with covered transactions where there is no risk, there should be no differential. It shouldn't be favorable to be in pound denominated assets compared to dollar denominated assets or vice versa. So market forces in both the exchange rate markets and also in terms of the bond markets in the two countries will actually bid away this preference for the pounds. So in equilibrium, I'll go over here, in equilibrium the covered differential will be bid away to being zero, and we will say that we have covered interest parity, and that means that there's no advantage to be in the pound denominated assets versus the dollar denominated assets for these covered transactions. And as your book tells you, this empirically this appears to be the case. So we have, this is the relationship between the exchange rates and the rate of return on various assets. So what you see is that you notice the British just cut their interest rates, so that makes investing in the UK less attractive, and so that obviously creates a big fuss in the markets, as you probably noticed. But this is something called covered interest parity, and the next video is about uncovered interest parity, when you don't cover the transaction.